You assume heaven opens through perfection, through purity, strength, or faith that never falters. You seek a state beyond weakness, a joy unbroken by sorrow. Yet Shams Tabreez questioned this pursuit. He said the door you look for does not open through control, but through the tear that ends it. The tear is not collapse, but clarity. The instant when resistance fails and awareness stands naked before itself. What you call weakness may be the very transparency that truth requires. Shams taught that grief, when understood, is not distance from the divine, but its unveiling. If truth enters only where defenses dissolve, then perhaps the one who breaks sees more clearly than the one who remains unshaken. What does the tear truly reveal? You build your life on composure. To be steady feels intelligent, dignified, mature. You hold yourself together because fragmentation feels like failure. Yet Shams observed that what you call strength is often avoidance, the refusal to be seen as you are. The intellect constructs walls of certainty, guarding itself from its own vulnerability. But truth cannot enter a closed system. It requires exposure. The tear interrupts that closure. It dismantles the false image of control. If you fear breaking, it is not pain you fear. It is the possibility that what you defended so long might never have been real. Shams taught that breaking is not the end of wholeness, but the end of ownership. The self believes it can hold reality. It cannot. It is the grasping that shatters, not the soul. What falls apart is the illusion of separation. Awareness itself remains untouched. The tear, for Shams, marks the point where self-centered will ceases to compete with what already governs existence. He said, "You cry when you stop pretending to command what commands you." The tear does not signal defeat, but realization. If nothing real is harmed by breaking, then who or what was wounded at all? You seek understanding through thought, as if truth must fit the framework of reason. You want explanations before you allow release. Yet Shams warned that intellect demands control even over surrender. The mind wants to know how to yield while still remaining superior. But awareness is not an achievement. It is what remains when achievement stops. The tear offends the intellect because it exposes the limit of thinking. It proves that comprehension cannot replace humility. When you stop trying to reason your way into truth, truth begins to appear by itself. If knowledge begins where control ends, then who is left to claim understanding? The tear is not emotion begging for comfort. It is recognition. It acknowledges that the intellect cannot contain what it encounters. Shams called it the confession of the mind, the silent admission that certainty was never possession, only pretense. The tear appears when meaning exceeds thought's capacity. In that moment, the mind bows to awareness itself. Humility becomes intelligence, and surrender becomes comprehension. The question changes. What if the truest form of knowing is to admit that knowing has reached its limit? You were taught to flee sorrow as failure, to see it as distance from grace. Yet Shams said sorrow refines perception. When you stop fighting it, you begin to perceive without decoration. In sorrow, the self cannot perform. It simply witnesses. The door you call pain does not open outward to another world. It opens inward to what has always been present. The awareness that feels sorrow is not wounded by it. It is revealed through it. If joy hides in the absence of resistance, then perhaps sorrow is not its opposite, but its preparation. Most tears defend identity. They say, "I am hurt. I am abandoned." They reinforce the one who suffers. Shams distinguished those from the tear of unveiling, where the I disappears. That tear belongs not to emotion, but to presence. It is not the self that cries. It is awareness realizing it was never separate. When the subject of grief vanishes, who observes the weeping? If the observer remains untouched and constant, perhaps it was never the person who wept, but the awareness through which all weeping occurs. Shams inverted ordinary logic. He said weakness is strength, emptiness is fullness, and silence speaks. He used paradox not for poetry, but for precision. The intellect defines meaning through contrast, joy against sorrow, gain against loss, but reality knows no opposites. The tear for him was the evidence of this collapse, language undone by truth. When you can no longer define, you begin to see. Meaning is not found in conclusions, but in the dissolution of opposition. If words lose balance in the face of experience, then where does truth rest when thought falls silent? In compassion, self, and other dissolve. You cry for another and discover no boundary between pain and witness. Shams said the tear of compassion is proof of unity, the moment when the same awareness feels through countless forms. The one who suffers and the one who sees are not two. The tear joins them. It does not divide, but reveals sameness. When you say, "I feel your pain," who is this I that feels both sides at once? Compassion, then, is not sympathy, but identity. The recognition that all sorrow and all seeing arise within the same consciousness. Heaven, said Shams, is not a destination, but the removal of division. It is not attained through striving, but uncovered through simplicity. The tear that opens heaven is not mystical. It is rational once understood. Heaven begins where resistance ends. Awareness, unguarded, no longer measures or separates. It does not need proof or reward. Seeing itself is its own completion. If heaven is nothing added but something revealed, then the only barrier was the belief that it was elsewhere. You once prayed for answers, for nearness, for peace. The tear answered before the words could. It said, "Stop asking. You are already within what you seek." The impulse to ask belongs to distance, but the tear ends that illusion. Question and answer fold into the same awareness. In the silence after the tear, the seeker disappears and the sought remains. If there is nothing left to gain, what remains of desire? If arrival was never separate from the path, who was traveling at all? What began as grief ends as understanding. The tear that once seemed like loss reveals itself as revelation. Nothing was taken. Only illusion dissolved. Shams Tabreez taught that the real does not arrive. It is uncovered when defense falls away. The tear did not open heaven. It removed the belief that heaven was closed. In that recognition, you stop resisting what is. You see that awareness was never divided, only obscured by its own effort to stay unbroken. The breaking was the blessing. The openness you feared was the entrance you sought. What breaks is false. What remains is whole. In that clarity, seeing itself becomes prayer.